Let's summarize the book of Daniel. So the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, yeah, he got a name on him. He took over Jerusalem. Then young men were chosen to eventually serve in the king's palace. They had to be healthy, good-looking, and gifted with knowledge. They would receive daily portions of food and wine from the king's kitchen. They'd be trained for 3 years, and they'd be taught the language and literature of the Chaldeans. Chaldean and Babylonian are interchangeable. And Chaldeans were known for being wise. 4 of the young men chosen were from Israel, and they were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But they were given Babylonian names: Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so Daniel decided that he wasn't going to eat or drink the king's meals. So keep in mind that eating the same food as the king was considered an honor. But Daniel did this because Israel was under law and the food wasn't kosher. But we're no longer under law, we're under grace, and we can eat anything we want. But we see that even though Daniel was in Babylon and in captivity, he still chose obedience to God. Daniel asked for a 10-day trial. After 10 days, Daniel and his friends looked healthier than all the other young men, so they were allowed to continue. And God gave Daniel and his friends knowledge and skill in literature and wisdom. And Daniel had the gift of interpreting visions and dreams. When the training was done and they were brought to the king, the 4 Hebrew boys impressed King Nebuchadnezzar the most. So they started working. They were 10 times more capable than any astrologer or magician in the entire kingdom. And remember, some men considered magic and astrology wisdom, but God considers it wicked and sorcery. Stay with me, it's about to get really interesting. Then one day, King Nebuchadnezzar had a disturbing dream and he wanted it interpreted. But first, he wanted the interpreter to tell him his dream without telling what it was. He called all the magicians and sorcerers to help him. They couldn't. So Nebuchadnezzar was mad and he made an order to kill all the wise men. This meant Daniel and his friends were next on the hit list. Daniel went home and told his friends, and they sought God for the answer. God revealed it to Daniel in a night vision, and he blessed the Lord. So the dream is a statue of a man. Daniel explained that Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold, and the other parts were future kingdoms, some weak, some strong, some divided. They'll try forming alliances, but like clay and iron, they won't mix. But God will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. So the king worshipped Daniel, and he said that Daniel's God is a God of gods and a revealer of secrets. And Daniel was promoted. But then Nebuchadnezzar makes this huge statue made of gold. It's 90 feet tall and 90 feet wide. And it's announced that when you hear the sound of music, you have to fall down and worship the gold statue, or else you get thrown into a fiery furnace. So the people heard the instruments and they fell down and worshiped the statue. But Daniel's friends were there and they were called out by some Chaldeans. Nebuchadnezzar got angry and he gave them one more chance to bow down to the statue. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, "The God we serve can deliver us. But even if he doesn't, we'll never serve your gods or worship the statue." Nebuchadnezzar commanded them to be thrown into the fiery furnace. Bro was so mad, he told them to make the furnace 7 times hotter than usual. I guess you could say he was heated. I'm sorry. The 3 Hebrew boys were tied up and they fell into the flames. But then suddenly the king's like, "Wait a minute, I see 4 men walking loose in the fire. They're not hurt, and the 4th is like the Son of God." It was Jesus. So Nebuchadnezzar told them to come out. Their hair and clothes were unaffected, they weren't burnt up, and they didn't even smell like smoke. So Nebuchadnezzar spoke highly of their trust in God and he praised God for saving them. And then he promoted them. So then Nebuchadnezzar sends a message to everyone. He's boasting about God, and he tells of another dream he had that no one could interpret except for Daniel. The dream was a tree that grew strong and it reached up to the heavens. It would be cut down and destroyed, but the stump and roots would be left behind, and it would live with the wild animals of the field for 7 periods of time. So Daniel explains that it's about the king, and he'll live that way until he learns that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the earth. Once that happens, he'll get his kingdom back. And Daniel advises him to stop sinning, and then maybe God will spare him. He doesn't get spared. 12 months later, the king is walking around the palace boasting about how he built Babylon brick by brick. And before he could finish his sentence, a voice from heaven told him he's no longer the ruler of the kingdom. And within the hour, Nebuchadnezzar is driven out of town. And he's in the field with the wild animals eating grass, just like his dream. Then Nebuchadnezzar finally humbles himself and he praises God. His position was restored and he had even more honor than before. So now it's many years later and there's a new king, Belshazzar, and he has a feast for 1,000 nobles, and he's drinking wine out of Jerusalem's holy vessels. And holy vessels were like cups, plates, bowls. They had specific uses in the temple and they were holy. But yeah, you can see how sacrilegious and problematic that is for Belshazzar. And as they were drinking, they were praising false gods. And then the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote on the wall. That's where the phrase "the writing on the wall" comes from. And the king was absolutely shook, like bro was spooked. And he said whoever could interpret would get a purple robe and a gold chain. He also said they'd be the 3rd ruler in the kingdom. So all the wise men came, but they couldn't read or interpret it. They call for Daniel and he's brought in. He doesn't want the reward, but he'll interpret. Daniel reminds the king of Nebuchadnezzar's reign and when God humbled him. And that knowing this, the king still hasn't humbled himself. Daniel explains the writing on the wall. It meant, God has numbered the days of your kingdom. You have been weighed and haven't measured up, and your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. That night, the king was killed, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom. Alright, stay with me. We're like halfway through it. You're doing good. Daniel still had favor with the next king, so much so that he was a high-ranking government official, one of 3 leaders, and he had a spirit of excellence in him. So the other governors and administrators, they wanted to find something to criticize or accuse Daniel with. They couldn't find anything because he had integrity. So they decided to set something up that was against his religion. They persuaded King Darius to make a decree. For 30 days, no one can pray to any god or man except King Darius, or else they'll get thrown into the lion's den. The king signed it, and it was final because the law of the Medes and the Persians was that a decree could not be altered. Daniel heard about it, he went home, he went upstairs, he knelt down with the windows open towards Jerusalem, and 3 times that day he prayed and thanked God, and that was his normal routine. And the other governors told the king. When the king realized what he signed, he was disappointed. His heart was set on saving Daniel, so he spent all night thinking about it. But because of the law, it had to happen regardless. So the king told Daniel, "Your God, whom you continuously serve, will deliver you." Daniel was put into the lion's den and a stone was rolled over the opening. So the king spent the night fasting and he couldn't sleep. Early in the morning, he went to the lion's den. He cried out for Daniel and asked if his God, the living God, was able to save him. And Daniel responded, saying God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth so they couldn't hurt him, because he was found innocent before God and the king. So the king was happy. Daniel was taken out of the lion's den and he wasn't injured because he believed in God. And the king commanded the men who accused Daniel to be thrown in the lion's den with their children and wives. And the king made a decree that everyone must fear and tremble before the God of Daniel, because he's the living God who delivers and rescues. So the rest of the book is Daniel's visions and prophecies. Daniel describes a night vision that he had earlier in the year. He saw a strong storm and 4 beasts come out of the water. A lion with eagle's wings, something like a bear, something like a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. And the 4th beast was terrifying, and it wasn't like any of the others, and it had 10 horns. And he saw thrones, and the Ancient of Days, God, sitting down to judge. God's clothes were white as snow. His hair was like pure wool, and his throne was like a fiery flame. Thousands of angels ministered to him, and millions stood before him. Then the court began, and the books were opened. And the beast with the 10 horns had another little horn come out with human eyes and an arrogant mouth. So it was killed and destroyed, and the other 3 beasts had their dominion taken away, but they were allowed to live a little longer. Then Daniel saw one like the Son of Man, Jesus, coming with the clouds of heaven, and he came to God. He was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all people should serve him. This vision troubled Daniel, so he asked a nearby angel. The angel explained that 4 kingdoms will arise, but God's saints will receive the kingdom and rule forever. The 4th beast stood for the 4th world power that will rule the world and devour it. Then a blasphemous king will come and turn against God and persecute the saints. And he'll want to change times and laws, and he'll be in control for 3.5 years. But he'll be judged, and all kingdoms will be given to the saints. Alright, stay with me. I know you were just binge watching a show on Netflix. We could read the Bible for a couple minutes. We could focus. So Daniel describes another vision he had. It was of a ram and a goat. Daniel heard someone tell the angel Gabriel to interpret it for him. When Gabriel approached, Daniel was afraid and fell on his face. Every time somebody sees an angel in the Bible, they're afraid, they're terrified. Gabriel told him the vision refers to the end times, and then Daniel fainted. This vision is double-fold because while it's talking about biblical times, it's also talking about a time for us that hasn't come to pass yet, which is the Antichrist and the end times. And the vision showed that the Greek Empire would break into 4 kingdoms and none would be as great as the first. At the end of their reign, a fierce king will rise to power, and he'll cause destruction and destroy powerful leaders and even God's people. He'll cause deceit, but he'll be defeated by God. And these things won't happen for a long time, so Daniel had to keep it a secret. Then he fainted and he was sick for days, and afterwards, he went back to work. Stay with me, you can do it. In the next chapter, there's a really cool description of an angel. So Daniel reads the prophecy from Jeremiah, and he learns that Jerusalem will be in captivity for 70 years. So at this point, he still has 3 or 4 years left. So Daniel pleaded with God, and he prayed and fasted, and he prays that the Lord turn his anger away from Jerusalem. And he says, "For the Lord's own sake shine his face on his desolate sanctuary. And he does this not because they deserve it, but because of God's mercy. As he's praying, the angel Gabriel came and says he's greatly beloved by God, and he came to help him understand. There'd be 70 weeks for Jerusalem to put an end to their sin, and there to rebuild Jerusalem despite troublesome times. And 483 years will pass before Messiah the Prince comes, Jesus. Jesus would be killed, seemingly accomplishing nothing. A ruler will destroy the city and the temple. There will be a flood, a war, and all types of things until the end. And the ruler will make a treaty with the people, but he'll turn from it and things will become very blasphemous and sacrilegious. But eventually, he'll meet his fate. Okay, this is where we hear about the angel. Daniel had another vision about things that would happen in the future during times of war and hardship. And at the time, he had been mourning for 3 weeks. He hadn't eaten any pleasant food, meat, or wine. So that's what we call the Daniel fast, but in full context, it technically isn't fasting, like in the standard biblical sense, which would be no food. Then Daniel saw a vision of a man in linen clothing with a belt of pure gold. His body was like a precious gem, face like the appearance of lightning, eyes like torches of fire, arms and feet the color of polished bronze, and a voice like a multitude of people. And only Daniel saw it, not the men that were with him. And Daniel was alone, and he became extremely weak. When the man he saw spoke, Daniel fainted. Then a hand touched him and made him tremble. Then the man said that Daniel is greatly beloved by God and to stand up because he's been sent to him. He tells him the first day he began praying, his words were heard, and that he's been sent as an answered prayer. The angel says that he took so long because he was fighting with the prince of the kingdom of Persia. So he was fighting with an evil angelic being for 21 days. But the archangel Michael came to help him. Michael is the head of all angels. Daniel was speechless, but the angel touched his lips and he was able to speak. So the angel told him that he had to go return to fight the prince of Persia and then the prince of Greece. Again, these are spiritual battles. And he tells Daniel that no one helps him against those spirits except for the archangel Michael, who is Israel's angel. We're almost done. The angel tells Daniel that 3 more kingdoms will come, but the 4th will be greater than the others. Then another successful king will rise to power. But at the height of his success, his kingdom will be broken and divided into 4 parts and given to others. And many things will happen. The king of the south will be powerful, but one of his own officials will be more powerful than him. Alliances will be formed with the north and the south, with all kinds of things like marriages. And the kingdoms will go back and forth. There will be a plot against the king of the south, and violent men will try to fulfill their plots, but they won't succeed. And there will be a deceitful man who takes over. He'll be powerful with only a small amount of people supporting him. And the king of the south's own household will cause his downfall. And the king of the north's plot will fail, and he'll take his anger out on God's people. And he'll reward those who turn away from God. He'll cause blasphemy, and he'll cause people to turn away because of his flattery. But the people who know God will be strong and resist him. Some of the wise will fall victim to persecution, but for some of them it's so they can be refined and purified to be ready for the end time. Many countries will fall and few will escape, and some will be taken for their gold and silver and their precious things, and they'll be his servants. Then the king will just annihilate many, but he'll come to his end and no one will help him. Alright, this is the last part. So the angel says Michael the archangel will arise, and there will be a time of trouble like never before, but those whose names are in the book of life will be saved. And that this time of trouble will last 3.5 years. And many people will be purified, cleansed, and refined by all of these harsh trials. But the wicked will continue to be wicked and they won't understand. Only the wise will understand. So then Daniel is told to go his way and rest until the end. In a sense of like, don't worry, just follow God. So that's the book of Daniel. The end is near. Get right with God.